All right, we are live and entered the simulation. Perhaps we are already in it. Whoa. So this is State of Play with Mint Press News, a live stream geopolitical editorial news show hosted by myself. Hey, folks. And whether you're staying in responsibly or listening to this while preparing for a night of unmitigated debauchery, we're glad you're here, and we may have time at the end for another Q&A. So this is our second episode in our first guest episode where we will talk about an aspect of blowback within the context of the Gaza war. To define blowback real quick, the term is used in the realm of information operations to describe negative side effects or repercussions that result from activities that harm U.S. national security interests. For example, the Pentagon has used the term to describe the deaths of Iraqi and Serbian civilians caused by American warplanes during the campaigns against Saddam Hussein and Slobodan Milosevic. These negative side effects from military and or intelligence operations range from, having right-wing counter-revolutionaries sell drugs to their sponsors' citizens, such as CIA and Nicaraguan Contras, cocaine trafficking shenanigans into the United States, to, giving intelligence and material support as well as political cover to a state actively committing a genocide, then having our own citizens in response not want to join the military. So that's kind of a roundabout way of saying that blowback from Gaza will negatively impact the already precarious U.S. military recruiting and retention rates. So U.S. military operational capacity and capabilities will continue to decline, and that will inevitably, in the interest of national security and of maintaining a viable military, begin to shift U.S. foreign policy. So tonight, we're going to be joined by two conscientious objectors from the U.S. Air Force who are separating from the military due to its complicity in genocide. We are, after all, again, giving Israel intelligence and weapons support. So now, I'm no expert on DNC and RNC politics, so I was left with, first of all, backing up, I know some of y'all were expecting me to touch on last night's presidential debate, and I will briefly, if only to give people more time to trickle in and join the live. So I'm no expert, again, on DNC and RNC politics. So I was left with profound questions like, what are black jobs? Why isn't anyone fact-checking Trump? Why isn't someone plugging in and recharging Biden? What's the deal with this whole nuclear war thing? And can we get it over with already? So I don't know who won. I don't know who lost. Well, actually, I do know who lost. It was America. And my 2 cents is the only part of debate worth watching is this. Just in case you guys missed it, I watched it, so you didn't have to.
Very good health. I just won 2 club championships, not even senior, 2 regular club championships. To do that, you have to be quite smart, and you have to be able to hit the ball a long way. And I do it. He doesn't do it. He can't hit a ball 50 yards. He challenged me to a golf match. He can't hit a ball 50 yards.
Look, I'd be happy to have a driving contest with him. I got my handicap, which when I was vice president.
Oh, yeah.
And by the way.
Okay, I just wanted to say right now, before we actually get into the heart of the episode, that this is the only debate these two octogenarians should be having, talking smack about their golf handicaps.
I told you before, I'm happy to play golf if you carry your own bag.
Just called him out on carrying his own bag.
He's a 6 handicap of all.
I was an 8 handicap.
Yeah.
8. But I have, how many?
I've seen you swing. I know you swing.
Okay,
let's not act like children.
President Trump, we're going to turn.
Let's not act like.
All right, so that was basically the debate. That's all. That's the only scene you really need to know from it. It looks like our neo-feudal robber baron overlords got complacent and forgot to give us 2 fake good candidates. Oh, well. So, anyways, it looks like we're all here just laughing as the empire falls and Rome burns. So let's talk about the status of the Roman legions. I mean, the U.S. military, of course. You're all about to get hit with some serious exposition as we get into this subject. So you don't die of boredom, as you know, I go through this kind of primer essay, I'm going to play some recruiting footage from the 75th Ranger Regiment from back when it was still the Global War on Terror. Hate that term, the GWAT. And the Ranger Regiment is a U.S. Special Operations Force and my old unit from a different life when I was in Afghanistan. So therapy works, y'all. And yeah, so here it goes. All right, so it looks the unprecedented live stream violence in Gaza has forced a crisis of conscience for many government employees. From State Department to the military, individuals have taken rebellious action to remove themselves from participating in a blazingly obvious campaign of controlled famine and collective punishment. Will the younger generation's lack of jingoistic zeal be a potential break for U.S. belligerence? America's all-volunteer force has recently been called into question with the worst recruitment numbers in years, in conjunction with escalating geostrategic tensions in Ukraine and East Asia. A central question is, of course, whether the Department of Defense can fix this national security problem. Since the inception of the all-volunteer force, there has been a perennial concern that economic growth hampers recruitment. Thus, the recruitment crisis is attributed mainly to a tight labor market. In layperson's terms, this is like when job openings are plentiful and available workers are scarce. Military service becomes less attractive as a source of financial stability, you know, when you can actually get jobs. So domestic economic forces, in conjunction with a lack of physically, educationally, and legally viable recruits, and overridingly, divisive views of what may be perceived as woke culture in the military are generally cited as the main sources of this recruiting crisis. However, this perception of woke culture typically misses the mark when conservative pundits lament the lack of military zeal in the younger generations. So, inclusivity and trans rights are not the primary reasons why buccaneering young men and women don't want to enlist in the combat arms and the services in general. According to a 2002 ABC article, the primary reasons cited for not wanting to join are the possibility of injury or death and fear of developing PTSD and or other psychological problems. Why would Gen Z, after watching Gen X and the millennials, like me, fight in two illegal wars before having their benefits slashed and suicide rates rising at an alarming levels, why would they want to be part of that cycle of violence and isolation? So the horror unfolding in Gaza has only exacerbated these sentiments. Our last occupational war ended in 2021, and we speedily transitioned into the era of tax-funded proxy wars. U.S. soft power, the ability to co-opt rather than to coerce, through aspirational values rather than through like military force or economic sanctions, has declined speedily over the post 9/11 years. So belligerent and ineffective foreign policy has boomeranged back on the military. It's kind of hard to tell us that, you know, we're the good guys. So fewer teenagers aspire to be party to the war machine, right? The genocide in Palestine has served as a catalyst of mass awakening that will undermine U.S. military capability and capacity. If recruiting shrinks by another 40,000 troops, a lot of analysts think we will reach a breaking point for low personnel numbers. You know, current members would have to pick up the slack, fill extra positions, and deploy for longer, get burned out quicker. So we are looking at a cascade failure. So history has shown, you know, throughout the ages that dissent within the ranks and a broader anti-war movement have always been decisive or instrumental in ending conflicts. And today is no different. It's actually, you know, in the national security interest to have less of a belligerent United States foreign policy, to stop fighting these dirty wars. So after the war in Afghanistan and Iraq ended, and like there was some stuff in Syria, some stuff in Libya, Yemen, you know, there has been this push because it was so damaging to, United States soft power and reputation, and also we didn't have the political and fundamental political clout to continue with all of these occupational wars. We have shifted to proxy wars like Ukraine, potential attempted coup in South and Central America. We've got, some people definitely see what's happening is it in Israel as a proxy war against Iran. I don't particularly see this as a proxy war, though. This is more supporting unconditionally a client state. But there it is. So we've transitioned from low intensity occupational wars to proxy wars, and those are still unpopular. Has been an unprecedented amount of blowback from what's happening in Gaza. So nobody expected it. The Biden administration is absolutely shocked. The military apparatus is reeling because, again, this is only exacerbating the recruiting crisis. And so a number of things have been done to try to tempt recruits. And we've seen inclusive diversity ads, be yourself in the United States military. I mean, I went through basic training and indoctrination when I was, that was like 2009, 2010. That was not part of the equation. So they've tried to reintegrate that back into it, right? And then one of the most recent ploys to get Gen Z on board with the military is e-girls. Basically, in uniform, thirst traps, be like, join the military. Look at all the hot chicks we've got. And it did work on some people, but that it's kind of dying out because I think people caught on. You've seen them. You know what we're talking about. So real quick, just to reorient this, there are paid military e-girls. We call them PSYOPs, which is like psychological operations to try to get you to join. And so this is obviously one of the most recent ploys.
Wake up, face. She's a PSYOP. She doesn't know you. She doesn't love you. Do not re-enlist because of her.
So that was just a little taste of what's going on the TikTok military algorithm, but it's been ineffective, and everybody wants to deal with all of these in the space of all these economic issues. Like, people have other opportunities. People don't need to join the military as much. That's not true. I don't know anybody who feels like they have more job opportunities right now. And then this whole woke culture, they're missing it. It's not about LGBTQ rights in the military. It's about these foreign wars that lack any sort of moral credibility that, the younger generations are more clued in on. They see that these foreign wars as damaging, not just to the people overseas, but to us as well. As I stated previously, PTSD is a main concern. They look at all these veterans that are homeless. They also see that homelessness is slowly being criminalized. And they don't want any part of that. They see a failing society and a military industrial complex that takes precedent over the veterans that served, over the soldiers, and over the citizens at large. So I think that it's really not going to get any better. And one of the reasons we wanted to do and bring on these conscientious objectors is because they're kind of saying that the tip of the iceberg is it's kind of an overused metaphor or analogy, but these conscientious objectors, there's only been a handful of them since the genocide started. Aaron Bushnell kind of was a catalyst for that, but they are representative of a much larger group of disgruntled soldiers that will probably not be conscientious objectors because they're close to retirement or they need the steady job because they have families, and we'll get into this later on in the interview, but they won't re-enlist. This starts to impact foreign policy because you have senators like Lindsey Graham and all these war hawks in Washington preaching war, bomb Iran, China, North Korea. They need to be put in their place through the use of military force. Well, they cannot actually effectuate their policy if there is dissent in the ranks. If what their policy is going to achieve is not any sort of definable strategic results, but a weakening and a lessening of military capability through like not having anybody. And so they're kind of in a tough position. Like, how do we perpetuate this foreign policy that only has dominance, that only preaches a doctrine of dominance over other countries, but still balance that with having a healthy and viable military? Because if people aren't going to join, then you have to draft. And what happens when you draft? Conscript militaries are not effective. They're not, because people don't want to fight. Their heart's not in it. We see a conscript military in Israel, essentially. I mean, they're ideologically on the same level, but serving for 2 years does not a soldier make. At 2 years, you still don't know what you're doing. And we're seeing a lot of reservists have to retrain. They've activated 50,000 reservists in northern Israel to potentially go and invade Lebanon, but they have to retrain for that. And they will never be as proficient as professional soldiers whose only job is to be soldiers. So the likelihood of a draft, it's not politically viable. I don't think the younger generations are going to be down with it because it'll be Vietnam Backlash 2.0. And the thing is, what will be the consequences of that? There'll be more mass demonstrations. The powers that be will call in the cops. There will be more violence. It'll make the younger generations hate the state more and want to fight less. It's because the more force you use, the more repression you use, the more resistance it's going to breed. So the military is kind of in this impossible situation. The only way to change it and to get people to recruit and fight for something is to make it something, again, that they believe in. So until you fix U.S. foreign policy, you're not going to get the younger generations on board. Yeah, you'll get some evangelicals and some more conservative people, but even some conservative people are starting to like change their views because they're like, why are we sending all this money to foreign wars? Why can't we invest in America? And so there's kind of this horseshoe effect that on some issues, the right and the left are coming together. So yeah, the only way to really fix it, and this is my editorial piece, is to fix U.S. foreign policy. So, and the main thrust of my argument is that until that happens, the recruiting crisis won't heal or fix or be ameliorated or get better in any way. And, hopefully this, and I'm kind of confident it will take some time, that this massive recruiting shortfall and retention rates in the military will begin to start to curtail, to ease, and to put brakes on the natural belligerence of U.S. foreign policy. Because we got these old boomer politicians acting like the U.S. still has the staying power that it had in the 1990s, where we could dominate the world through sanctions and through the threat of military intervention. Because in Desert Storm, Saddam had one of the scariest militaries on the planet. Didn't last long. Sanctions were way more effective, but as Russia has shown us, well, the sanctioning of Iran has shown us, is that in spite of these economic sanctions, which we used to get people to toe the line, didn't really work. So we don't have the staying power. We need to transition to a more multipolar world order. The unipolar thing could still exist if we still had the same staying power and power projection that we had, again, in earlier decades. So this is really the only option. We'll see if our brave corporate masters, political leaders, will allow for it to happen. But in the meantime, let's get into the Air Force Conscientious Objectors. So let's send it. Tonight on State of Play, we are joined by two active duty airmen, i.e. service members in the U.S. Air Force, in case y'all aren't tracking, who have chosen to become conscientious objectors in response to U.S. complicity in what is happening in Gaza, specifically. So just to define our terms, a conscientious objector is an individual who has claimed the right to refuse or perform military service on the grounds of freedom of conscience or religion. The term has also been extended to objecting to working for the military-industrial complex due to a crisis of conscience. So on March 8th, 1995, the United Nations Commissions on Human Rights Resolution 1995/83 stated that persons performing military service should not be excluded from the right to have conscientious objections to military service. So the Center on Conscience and War, a nonprofit organization that advocates for the rights of conscience, has, since October 7th, helped over 40 U.S. troops file for conscientious objector status, who cite the U.S. role in the Gaza genocide as the fundamental deciding factor. So the U.S. Air Force said it has acted on 36 conscientious objector applications since the beginning of 2021. Of those, 29 were apparently granted. So we may touch on that here in a bit, but for now, let me bring on and introduce, pulling up the stage. Here we go. Juan Bettancourt, a senior airman in the U.S. Air Force currently stationed in Texas, who has stated, quote, "This ongoing genocide, primarily funded by the American taxpayer money, has served as a catalyst for our conscience to evolve and for us to remain resolute in our humanistic stance against participating in any form of war." We also are joined by senior airman Larry Herbert, avionics specialist based in Rota, Spain, conscientious objector applicant seeking separation as a result of the genocidal terrorist attacks on Gaza by the U.S.-backed Israeli militia. You guys are pulling no punches. Thanks so much for coming on.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that you are being far more productive with your free time right now than I was. You know, every free moment I spent on active duty was like drinking and pursuing women in order to distract myself from the cognitive dissonance required to fight for America's freedom in Afghanistan. So all things being equal, you are way further ahead of me in the activism game. So congrats on that. So I watched some of the interviews you did with like NBC, and it was strictly just factual reporting. But here we're going to get more conversational and expansive and really get into the weeds. So before we get into Gaza and objector status, I wanted to ask y'all, and this is a broad question, whoever wants to go first, why did you decide to join the military? Was it simply practical, or was your decision also driven by a system of beliefs, desire for service? What?
You can go first, Juan, if you want.
Well, there was really a plethora of reasons why I joined. There was a professional desire. I was 29 at the time, so I wanted to, do something interesting, different in my early 30s. At that time, I had been in academia for almost 10 years, and I saw the military as a great step towards a career of public service.
Yeah, and for me, it was mostly for the financial incentive. At the time, I was newly married and about to have my first child, and so I kind of needed something to give me that sense of security. And the Air Force was that option. And I had met dozens of different veterans from all different branches, and they had all told me that I should join the military, and I won't have to worry about my paycheck to paycheck and struggling to meet ends meet. And then they all, for whatever reason, recommended the Air Force. And that came from Marines, Navy, Army, and Air Force themselves. So I figured if dozens of people are recommending this, then I'd be a fool not to take them up on their advice.
No, I hear you. It was actually a mixture of both for me too. Not a unique story, just trying to get out of a bad situation and a place to live and money. Also, I did kind of believe in what we were doing too at the time. So it was a mixture. So I guess, how has the continued military action in Gaza influenced your decision to become a conscientious objector? Did you know about the situation in Palestine before October 7th, or is this all relatively new for y'all?
Yeah, I'd say I was pretty much completely ignorant to Israel-Palestine. I didn't know anything about these countries or the conflict. And so October 7th was ultimately like that wake-up call. I didn't actually find out until probably October 10th or 11th when I was scrolling through social media and actually seeing the footage coming out. But yeah, once once I saw what was going on, it didn't take too long to kind of figure out what the situation was. And I tried to give it a both sides a chance, right? I wanted to get the Palestinian perspective and the Israeli perspective, and there's so many like flaws in the Israeli perspective and so many lies. It's really hard to like not just see through that.
Mhm.
For me, it was a catalyst. I've been aware of the situation in Palestine ever since, early college, but it's a very different situation when one knows about these issues through a diplomatic foreign policy lens rather than being, in the midst of it, being implicated directly. There's an experiential dimension that comes with this conflict that after October just made it impossible for me to look away and to ignore my own complicity within the conflict.
Mhm. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of knew somewhat about what was going on. I'd read official like military literature about the IDF being incredibly problematic, and I knew the response was going to be bad, but I had no idea it was going to be this bad. I think on October 15th, I saw them dropping like 1,000-pound GBUs, and I've seen those dropped in theater. I was like, oh my. Wow, they're actually in the most densely populated place on Earth. And you guys were in the Air Force. You may have more of a knowledge about what was actually being dropped. You said, Larry, that you're avionics specialist, so you work on aircraft. And I think in one of your press statements, did you mention that was a factor that you occupationally worked on these same aircraft that were conducting these bombing campaigns?
Yeah. I don't know the specifics as far as like the missions that are being pushed directly to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
At the time of October 7th, I was actually on absence. I had just had a child in July, and so I didn't even get back to work until I think the end of October. But eventually, I did partake in a mission that was delivering cargo to Israel, and that obviously had weapons, and that was like a huge wake up call for me. Like I knew I had already solidified like my beliefs that I wanted to get out, and obviously I was highly against Israel and our support for them, but the actually seeing like what was being sent, that was just devastating to me. And I wish at that moment that I had said, like, I can't do this. I can't be a part of this mission. And I didn't, because it wasn't really like, my role in it wasn't very like, it wasn't like a lead role or anything. We're just like gassing these planes. We're not like, loading the cargo, and like, that's not my position. But yeah, I still wish I would have done that. And I don't know whether those weapons that were being sent were like offensive or defensive, like for the Iron Dome, for instance. But yeah, it's still like a really like regrettable thing that I did. So I still think about that.
Mm-hmm.
I was in communications, and my mission had no direct involvement with that area of the world. However, once you start understanding these institutions as systems that are entwined with one another, you begin to see how all of us are implicated, and how this is ultimately one large mission that supports Israeli military offensive.
Right. And you, I think it was Larry, you said in a press statement, or no, I think it was Juan, in your press statement, you said that Aaron Bushnell was a catalyst, his act of extreme protest in front of the Israeli embassy earlier this year. Can you tell me more about like that? And did you have conversations with other service members where you guys kind of like found each other and were like, oh yeah, I feel this way about that action as well? And did it like make you find your like clique within the military? Like just What happened after that?
Somewhat. So yes, Aaron's self-immolation in front of the Israeli embassy in DC was a turning point, because I began to see how I was not alone. I had been publicly speaking to peers and leadership against what was going on. I was very adamant about denying orders in the case my mission was put in service of assisting the IDF. But after Aaron's self-immolation, began to really question deeply my implication in the military. And it was through that I began to contact Veterans for Peace, and I began to speak more openly with colleagues. And surprisingly, many of them share similar sentiments. They understood that what we're witnessing through our phones, what we're witnessing through media reports, are absolute war crimes. They're genocidal in intent. But again, the military is a complex institution. People have, Greg, retirement, housing, education on the line, and so they are beholden to those interests and are scared to speak out. And it's also an institution that doesn't really welcome dissent. It's the institution in which you have to follow orders. And so a lot of them silently supported me and pushed me further to continue dissenting until I finally made the decision to claim conscious objector status, because I was just no longer comfortable. My conscience was no longer comfortable with participating in any form of war.
Yeah. So I just wanted to play the press statement that what we saw, the official position of the Pentagon with General Pat Ryder, who is the head of the press corps, the press wing for the Pentagon. And he gets asked straight up, well, does this have any effect, or is this reflective of what's happening in the ranks? And he's like, well, Israel has the right to defend itself, and we keep pressuring them to follow international humanitarian law. Just in case you guys forgot about this infamous interview.
Yesterday, an active duty service member set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in protest of U.S. support for Israel's operations in Gaza. Has the Secretary been briefed on Airman Bushnell, and is he concerned that maybe this airman's actions may indicate that there's a bigger issue within the military as far as U.S. support for this ongoing operation?
Yeah, so the Secretary is following the situation. I know the Air Force has confirmed the airman's death. They do plan to provide additional information 24 hours after next of kin notifications are complete. It certainly is a tragic event. We do extend our condolences to the airman's family. In terms of the incident itself, Tara, as you know, the DC Metropolitan Police Department has the lead for responding to questions about that incident. So anything on that, I'd have to refer you to them.
Just push it off on the DC police.
Yeah.
But is the Secretary concerned that this might indicate that there's a deeper issue, maybe the U.S. military personnel being concerned about how weapons and support for Israel is being used on civilians in Gaza?
Well, look, from a Department of Defense standpoint, since Hamas's brutal attacks on October 7th, we've been focused on the 4 key areas that the Secretary set out from the onset. That's protecting U.S. forces and citizens in the region, supporting Israel's inherent right to defend itself from terrorist attacks, working closely with Israel to support and secure the release of hostages from Hamas, and ensuring that the conflict between Hamas and Israel doesn't escalate into a broader regional conflict. And so those objectives are what continue.
Okay, I mean, I really wouldn't expect any enlightened statement or anything from the Pentagon, because no matter what, they will publicly toe the administration's line, whatever lead the executive branch is giving. So as an outsider, no longer being involved in the military, I was just wondering what the conversation was immediately after this happened. And, as someone who was speaking out, have you faced any social or hierarchical backlash from your command or your peers since you decided to file as an objector?
I haven't received any backlash from my leadership I received a lot of messages from support from peers, people again that, silently support me. But I've also received messages that reject and question my motives. Peers called me a coward, a traitor, and it's a good opportunity to remind them that, the same Constitution that we pledge an oath to, enshrines freedom of conscience, and this is something that is within our right as citizens and as service members. And I also take that opportunity to, speak about what's going on in Gaza, what's been going on since '48, and so those sort of opportunities, rather than, becoming, pugnacious and sort of leading to nowhere, become opportunities for me to talk about Palestine in general and to talk about why we should reject war in all forms.
Yeah, and I didn't really face much backlash at all. I was actually surprised when I got back from DC, and I went to DC because of the lack of response to Aaron Bushnell's self-immolation from all leadership within the government and in the military. So that's ultimately what set me off, because at that point I was going to just get out quietly and write out the rest of my contract. And when they showed that much just disrespect towards another service member, giving his life for this and just not acknowledging him or iterating his name, that was just so against everything I thought that we kind of stood for. But when I got back from DC, I was actually surprised at how many people supported me, because I hadn't had those conversations internally about Gaza and about Israel, and it was definitely surprising. And there have been people that that were obviously upset with what I did, but most people kind of just try to ignore the topic or ignore me as a person, because they have their own careers. And like Juan brought up, the military sort of dangles the benefits in front of you, and I guess it kind of scares a lot of people from speaking out or speaking up internally even. And I have heard from others that there is a large amount of service members that wholeheartedly disagree with our current policies. And it's extremely hard for them to voice those concerns because of the reliance on the military to support their family. A lot of these service members have kids and multiple kids. So I understand from that regard, but for me personally, I would rather struggle paycheck to paycheck than take money from an organization that is supporting this.
No. Yeah, I get it. I mean, I never filed or took the stance that you guys did. Honestly, when I was in a combat unit, I was pretty much more scared of death than social annihilation or disgrace, because that's just where my head was. Didn't have a family, but instead of re-upping and re-enlisting, I just wrote out my contract. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that. So, I mean, I've heard from multiple sources that other service members are appalled by what's happening, and the retention numbers are going to suffer. Also, recruiting numbers are going to suffer. We have the biggest recruiting crisis in what U.S. military history right now. And a lot of this has to do with our engagement in forever wars. This is one of the big reasons we don't want to put boots on the ground in Yemen or actually go back. And because it's a huge national security concern that just about everybody except the Air Force and the Marines are below quota significantly. And that's not going to it's not gonna help when younger generations who are more politically aware than I was as like some millennial looking at this and being like, I don't want to be part of the death machine. Like, why are we actually fighting these wars? They grew up watching Iraq and Afghanistan turn into nothing. So all of this is actually just not healthy for the United States military in terms of achieving its operational goals and remaining like combat and operationally effective. So we see like retention rates are going to drop. Recruiting is going to become a massive issue. People are worried about the draft, but that will backfire if they even try something that crazy at this point. So it just seems like this massive policy, this unilateral policy of supporting these wars unconditionally, refusing diplomatic solutions is just incredibly harmful. And I'm just wondering if that's like a conversation that y'all have had.
It has been. And I think, beyond political awareness regarding U.S. foreign policy and forever wars, I think there's also an awareness of how veterans have been left out to dry, have been failed by a system. You can see the suicide rates, the number of homeless veterans, the lack of support they receive, and they see the duplicity. They see that there's a propaganda that hails them as heroes, but treats them as disposable. And people are beginning to question whether that is a career route worth pursuing. And they're also questioning the patriotic pillars in which that service is sort of upheld in American society.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that others are going to start following in your footsteps? You were among the first like visibly apparent people to file for conscientious objector status. So my question is, do you think other people will follow? I mean, it's already symbolically significant that you're doing it, and like not re-enlisting will also be just as kind of impactful practically. But yeah, do you see anyone following your footsteps? And do you think that will change policy at all, or institutional policy within the Air Force, military, and what exactly was that process?
Yeah, and I think you kind of touched on it already. Retention rates and recruitment are already bleeding. As the operational tempo. So now with this going on, and with me and Juan and Harrison Mann and Riley Livermore, I believe, and just more and more people coming out publicly, it's going to really start to hurt numbers. I think the more that we continue to speak out and reject what's going on, and I think it's extremely important for people to utilize their rights and voice their concerns internally too, because I think a lot of people would be surprised at how many people feel this way. And I think that ultimately will change the atmosphere. And I don't think people have to directly apply for conscientious objector, but that obviously helps as far as the numbers side of it, and to show that this is exactly what we are opposing. I don't think anybody joining the military was really going in thinking, yeah, I want to continue warfare for the end of time. I think the ultimate goal for people is, what we think is like, we're involved in these wars to eventually get to a point of peace. But that's not the ultimate goal, like behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. It's kind of something we're told to keep us motivated and think we're doing the right thing, and we're just not.
Yeah.
I sure hope to herald a change of attitude. As Larry said, perhaps not, for mass movement of conscious objectors, but at least for people to speak out and do whatever they can in whatever capacity. I receive messages, people calling me hero or that you're being so brave. And really, at least I can speak for myself here. I feel like I'm doing the bare minimum. I'm just following my conscience. I'm seeing wickedness. I'm calling it out, and I'm doing the little that I can, and the capacity of an airman to try to change or this country's policy and the course in which we're in right now.
Right. And just as kind of some final questions, I don't know anything about the conscientious objector process. Do you retain your benefits if you get approved and you get separated?
Yeah, you can get out with an honorable. Yeah, you can get out with an honorable. It just depends on how the process goes. It's actually interesting. I learned from Maria Santelli, who was with the Center on Conscience and War, that the approval rate is only about 50% for conscientious objectors, unless they work with the CCW, in which the rate actually goes up to 99% approval rating. So if you reach out to the GI Rights Hotline and work with the Center on Conscience of War, the Quaker House, whatever it is, they get you on the right track. They've dealt with this for decades, and I think a lot of people, once they begin writing the application, they'll start looking for resources to give them the inspiration and the answers to the questions that are in the application. And that's actually how I became a CEO. Was like I kind of already believed in, anti-war. I already felt like I had that, but I didn't know how or why. And while writing the application and looking for these resources, that's how I really developed and solidified those beliefs.
So in closing, I just wanted to, is there anything else you'd like to say in the off chance there are any active duty service members watching this? If they are watching this, they're probably on the fence right now. So just any closing remarks that you can think of.
I would urge them to follow their conscience and to think about the legacy that they want to leave behind for their children and grandchildren. I would also direct them to Veterans for Peace, the website. Larry and I have been championing this appeal for redress, which is inspired by the first appeal for redress that came out in 2006 in the wake of the highly unpopular invasion of Iraq. And this is a safe, constitutionally protected campaign that allows service members to directly express their moral outrage, their disgust to what's going on in Gaza directly to elected officials. So again, this is protected speech. It's constitutionally protected again. And so we want to leave that note here and encourage them to write to their elected officials, make their voice heard. Which
is their right. And Absolutely. They're well within their means to do so.
That's something worth reiterating, because when I was in the military and active duty, I didn't really imagine that I had rights, but you do. Okay, you definitely do have rights. You may have signed your kind of about 4 years. I'm not sure, however long your contract was. Signed a few years of your life away, but you still are a human being with rights. So, and you can exercise them. So we're going to link the Center on Conscience and War down to the bottom, and also Veterans for Peace and the hotline y'all mentioned. So discontent within the ranks has historically always been a political force and a decider on whether or not a country or a nation commits to another war. And it doesn't seem, with the recruiting crisis ongoing, that is sustainable to have a functional military that's up to operational requirements and, going to another forever war in the Middle East. So hopefully logic and sanity will prevail. I wanted to thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day to come on and talk about your experience as conscientious objectors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg.
I appreciate it.
Peace.
Okay, so we actually had to record that segment yesterday, because they're both active duty and they still have like crazy schedules, plus Larry's in Spain, so it's kind of late. This stream would be kind of late for him. So, I mean, it is a Friday night and midnight's not that late, but yeah, it was just a lot easier. So, wanted to, again, respect to those guys for what they're doing and coming on and talking about it. Now, again, theme of this episode, hopefully a discontent within the ranks, and I do think it will have an impact, will affect eventually U.S. foreign policy to be less belligerent. But however, does take time. If we're looking at historical precedents, we can look to Vietnam. Who was spearheading the Vietnam backlash, especially in the 70s after we'd been fighting for like 5 years? It was veterans. It was VAW, Veterans Against the War. But, you know, it was a different time. But again, these things take time. 10 years from 1965 to 1975 to change the massive war-oriented machinery of the United States government. So this is a marathon. It's not a sprint, but these symbolic things are important. They're important for the movement. They're important for any activist movement to see someone from the other side come on the team. So hope you guys enjoyed that. That was our first guest interview. And just before we go any further, I just wanted to say that Mint Press is an independent newsroom and doesn't have any corporate sponsors. Mint Press has been banned from PayPal. Fundraisers have been taken down from GoFundMe and demonetized on YouTube. If you'd like to support this brand of independent journalism, consider dropping your Economist subscription and slinging $5 a month to Mint Press because it goes a long way. And if not, I get it. We are, after all, being nickeled and dimed to death in contemporary society. Like we now have to, where I live, we now have to tip people who work at a convenience store because nobody wants to pay their workers like living wages. So we are getting nickeled and dimed to death because the system's completely broken. Again, that's an editorial. This is an editorial stream. It's just like an opinion, man. So anyways, we're just glad you're here. Consider subscribing to Patreon, though. So I think we're going to transition now to some questions. All right. What do we got? We've got some that are pinned. Okay. Have you seen the whistleblower about the Bettancourt scandal in the UN for Camp Bondsteel in Kosovo? Okay, so Bettancourt, they no longer really exist. They were big in Afghanistan. They were on all of our forward operating bases. So the scandal that I'm most familiar with was they were accused of overbilling the U.S. government by more than 90 million or 100 million. I don't remember the exact figures because it was such a long time ago, but not like $100 million on an anti-terrorism contract. I'm not sure what the contract was, but that was the big scandal recently. So it was accused of dumping its local contractors in Afghanistan following the Taliban takeover. I'm not really sure about that, but in the 90s, I think what you're referring to, if it's Kosovo, Bettancourt was criticized for being involved in human trafficking and like sexual exploitation of refugees in Bosnia. You know, to me, it just sounds like an average run-of-the-mill U.S. defense contractor. You look anywhere, like Blackwater happened in Baghdad, in one of my best friend's sectors. Everyone hated BlackRock. They rebranded, became Z, and then something else happened, and now they're Academy. So it's the same institutions. They just change their names and rebrand after all these scandals. So another one that Christina asks is, do you think the recruiting crisis also has to do with military assaults and harassment and retaliation, that the military retention has decreased so much? I'm not sure. I haven't looked at any numbers. I just know, I can imagine if I was a woman, that would be a massive consideration for me, whether or not to join, because some of those numbers are pretty gnarly. They're not as gnarly as the IDF figures, internally reported figures for sexual assault, I think, or at least sexual harassment. I think they're up to 33%. I was looking at those numbers from the IDF internal reporting, and they were pretty bad. There's like 1/3 of women said that they had experienced sexual harassment. And those were just the ones who were willing to report it. It's a lot more hostile. I can imagine it being a lot more hostile environment to report these things in the IDF than it is the United States military. Question to all of them, Cafe Moto X. Do you see the military dealing with recruitment issues by moving more to autonomous, robotic, and remote controlled devices? Not yet, because those can't do complex tasks. Like we see those robot dogs being tested in Gaza, right? But you see how slow their target acquisition is. They have the M4, the assault rifle mounted on the back. It has a motion detector. It turns, it kind of like tracks on gears. It's like, zzz, and then it fires. That's not a quick enough reaction time to engage targets. And I don't know if it's at a place where it can differentiate between civilians and combatants. I do recognize, however, that is not a consideration for the Israeli Defense Force, though. So maybe, the thing is, target acquisition's not there, and also there are a lot of complex tasks to be done. Like robots can't load aircraft yet and secure the gear down properly, because that's actually a really important task that you wouldn't trust an automation system to, because there's a whole bunch of checks. Every load's different. It's hard to program how to do that as things stand right now. That's just one example. No, the tasks are way too complex in the military, even for a routine job. So do you want a robot packing your freaking parachute? I was in an airborne unit. I would not want a robot packing my parachute. So do you think the population, Thomas asked, do you think the population lack the ability financially, will suffer from not using the U.S. war machine to further? Okay, one second. Do you think the population lack the ability to, from not using the U.S. to further educate people in high-level education? Well, I think this is what I understand. Like, does the U.S. leverage higher education to get people to join? Yeah, actually, the inaccessibility of higher education for middle and lower class people is one of the reasons the military is attractive. So this is why we call it not the MIC, the military industrial complex. It's the military, it's the MIMAC now. It's the military industrial media academic complex. Leveraging colleges, making them expensive and exclusionary is good for the universities, and it's good for the military, because it's one of the main reasons people join up. I ran off personally from home, essentially, and I didn't really have any college funds, but one of the big draws to the military was like, boom, I get free college. I can literally go to wherever I want. I'll sign up for almost 5 years. Heck yeah. And then, I went from like no money to going to Columbia University. So it's a great way to get people in the military. And it's good in some ways, because it's the only way people can get an education. And that is totally leveraged by the military, industrial, media, and academic complex. They all feed into each other. So, Christina, what is the likelihood the U.S. military stop loss is currently serving members due to continuing retention issues? Okay, y'all, stop loss is nasty. It's gnarly. Let me define terms real quick. This is our last question. So stop loss is an advance order okay, that's one second. That's the financial meaning. I'm not good at terms. I know all the good words. I know the best words. Get used to hearing that voice. But I don't know the definitions very well. So in the United States military, stop loss is a force management program that involuntarily extends a service member's active duty beyond their initial end of service date. So guys were getting stop lossed in Iraq. They were like fighting in Baghdad. They thought they were going home. And they're like, oh, nope, sorry, you've been here for 13 months. You're going to stay here for another year. And so what happened? Like people started like killing themselves, getting depressed, refusing to fight. Stop loss doesn't work. They might try it again. I mean, rationale seems to be losing out right now. But if they stop loss people, there's going to be a massive backlash. You think there's a lot of service members filing for conscientious objectors right now? And when we talk, we're going to go keep going for another couple minutes because this is a great subject. People are talking about stop lossing or falling for conscientious objectors, people not re-enlisting. But there's actually a lot of people that are rebelling against the military system right now that are going unreported. People are going AWOL, absent without leave. People, there's just a whole plethora of ways that you can like resist. But if stop loss happens and the draft happens, as I said, the more you repress people, the more resistance is going to be generated. So really, I do think, and this is not just me, but other guys who are in the realm of military and political analysis when it comes to these type of things, is the only real way to fix this is to make military service something to be in U.S. foreign policy, something that younger kids can get behind. Because after watching 2 pointless occupational forever wars and then watching this genocide in Gaza, it's just not playing the same way that it used to. So, stop loss is like the worst possible idea. And the psychological impacts of being drafted into something you don't believe in, or being stop lost to continue service in support of something you don't believe in, is massively damaging both to the individual and to the institution itself. Again, the only sane answer is diplomatic solutions and doing the right thing. I know it sounds corny, but like, could we just do it for once? That would be nice. I was stop loss. Rebellious Rainbow says I was stop loss due to Iraq. Same month I got my release letter. I sent my release letter to stop loss office. Never heard from them again. Well, you were lucky. You escaped the stop loss. I'm very happy for you. So, all right, folks. Well, I think we're at the end of our time. If you enjoy Mint Press, again, check out Patreon. Thank you so much for coming on Friday night, listening to some other service members talk about their experience and their disillusionment and their activism. So we're going to be back on Monday. We're trying Fridays. We might reevaluate. We might shift to Thursdays if more people are going to watch. But this is kind of our test period because the show's just launching. So we're definitely going to be doing Monday at 7 p.m. Central Time, because if you haven't noticed, since October, all the bad, controversial stuff happens over the weekend. So Monday is our weekly weekend roll-up where we examine every horrible thing that happened. So hope to see you there. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on State of Play on Mint Press News. Thank you so much.